Hey y'all, welcome back to Face Facts Friday here on Colorful Story. I am happy to walk with you through the Reconstruction Era. This week we are going to be talking about racial science, something we really don't talk about enough in our schools and in our community when it comes to how science has impacted our community pre-Civil War, post-Civil War, in Reconstruction, and now. Now, friends, you may be familiar with some of the so-called scientists such as Josiah Clark Knott, George Glidden, and Samuel Morton, who published The Types of Mankind in 1854. Their goal was to justify why Caucasians were superior and anyone who was not Caucasian was inferior to Caucasians. Yeah, I know, right? Now, the logic behind such buffoonery was to make sure that the black race did not dilute the white race in any way, form, or fashion. I know, it's a thing about being pure, and the purest race was considered to be the white race. So going back to 1846 with Louis Agassiz, however you say his name, he argued that all 7 continents had their own Adam and Eve story. He said that all races were created by God, no less, but they were inferior in a lot of ways. He looked at himself in a suit and compared himself to a naked enslaved African to come up with this theory. Science. We'd also hear from Mr. Samuel George Morton, who decided to take a step further and said that our skulls determine our intellect as well as our moral capability. He used this study called craniology to come up with this justification. He has a book called Crania Americana from 1839, where he begins to rank us by melanin or lack thereof. So at the top, you will have Caucasians, who are considered the most intellectually smart group. He will follow that up with East Asians, which is how they come up with the idea of the model minority with the Asian community, followed by South Asians, Native Americans, and last but not least, Ethiopians or anyone of African descent. And I quote, he says that they are the lowest grade of humanity. Science. Now we move on to Samuel Cartwright from New Orleans. What a disgrace to my hometown. He comes from the ilk of Martin and Agassiz, whatever his name is, who stated that Negroes had 2 diseases that they suffer from. The first one was drapetomia, which is the disease that causes them to run away. So his cure for this would be to make sure that the Negro was constantly in a submissive role. And if he chose to run away, you cut his foot off. Now, what that ended up doing in turn was devaluing the slave, because if you cut his foot off, he can't work, which means you can't make no money and you can't resell him. So in turn, what happened was the slave owner was like, hey, well, he ran away. He's basically useless to me now, so I gotta kill him. Yeah, I know. Very stupid. Cartwright further went on to discuss this disease called rascality. Rascality, which means that the free Negro had no way to control his impulses to be mischievous. They were prone to destroying property and assaulting animals and white women. So they had to be cured of such disease. They did not need to be free. So what happens when you combine science, racial science, with religion, white evangelicalism, that says Black people were scientifically and by God proven to be inferior to Caucasians? You seek it with power to pass legislation. And that's exactly what they did in the 1850s. Kansas and Nebraska had this act that allowed for white settlers to justify slavery based on science and religion. What they did not count on was somebody like Frederick Douglass, who was like, hell nah, we not finna do this. And I'm about to use your own words against you. So Frederick Douglass decided that he was going to challenge Edward Pollard's lost cause, which we will definitely get into dragging one of these days, that was pushed by John Daniel at the Richmond Examiner, who said that science supports the subjugation of Black people. But if we are wrong, we will be creating the greatest robbery. And because he said this, Frederick Douglass was like, oh, so there's a possibility. And so he called him out for this language. But good old Daniel was like losing it because Frederick Douglass was like going to use his words against him. And he was like, well, what we're not finna do is try to use my words against me. So I'm going to come back and say with my whole chest, the Negro is not a man. And he has no such rights to freedom. You know, because, you know, words mean things. And they had to go back and backtrack what they said. Now, someone like a governor in South Carolina named Benjamin Franklin Perry, because the creativity of names is a thing that they like. He went on to say that God created two races to be different, and so he did not mean for them to be equal. Hinton Helper then shifted the narrative to target poor whites by saying that these, and I quote, night-born ogres with low receding foreheads, stuttering speech, monkey likeness, and imbecilic minds did not deserve to have the respect because they would one day be a problem for whites. In the late 19th century, they argued that Charles Darwin, whose biological theory should be applied to social norms, and that was Herbert Spencer and William Sumner. So they felt like if you were wealthy and rich, you were biologically and culturally superior. And if you weren't, that's because you were biologically and culturally inferior. Sound familiar? Just saying. Now, why did we go all the way back? Because there is a direct correlation to what comes next, which is eugenics. And eugenics was very dangerous post Civil War, because it brought about this new way of getting rid of free Black people. Now, it started in one of some of y'all's favorite college, Harvard, which was the center for eugenics. And it basically justified the murdering and sterilization of Black people, because when they broke it apart into two parts, they had two uses for eugenics. The first one was positive eugenics, horrible term, which means that they will cultivate this breeding ground to create a superior race while causing the inferior race to die off. And because as if that was supposed to be the positive side of it, we have negative eugenics, which states that banning interracial marriages, restricting immigration, and making it mandatory to sterilize those who are inferior was important to keep the superior race superior. Indiana was like, let me jump on this. And they were the first state to pass a eugenics law. And how do they do it? Well, in 1907, they used the criminal justice system to do it. The Indiana law said that criminals, such as rapists and murderers, should not be allowed to procreate. They also threw in there imbeciles and idiots. And who did they label as idiots and imbeciles? Well, they ended up having their judicial system to lock up Black people for any and everything. And that is how they started to push eugenics in the criminal justice system. sterilizing people without their knowledge, or in some cases with their knowledge. After World War II, forced sterilization on Black women became this big fad, right? So Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the biggest voices exposing it. She was telling her story of how they forced sterilization on her without her knowledge. So they took away her right to bear children before she became privy to it. Like, imagine that. Imagine all this pro-life talk we get, but we never talk about how there was a real effort to make sure that Black women could not bear children. So stop coming for our community saying that we're out here killing babies at the highest rate. Now, eugenics is a very important topic because we don't really realize, like, the whole concept of the idea was taking place after enslaved Africans have been freed. So the idea of getting rid of an inferior race was a reaction to them losing their free labor, their profits off of this free labor, the ability to sell this labor, to do what they want with this labor without repercussion. And so to them, it was like, why on earth is it okay? Why do I have to accept the idea that they want autonomy for their own bodies, to be married, when all of these things are backed up by racial science and white evangelicalism that says I'm supposed to be inferior, I'm supposed to be able to oppress these people, it is my God-given right, I shouldn't have to accept this. There was a real push to make sure that science and medicine could erase the Black race in America. And that goes into the skepticism from our community when it comes to science and medicine, because historically we haven't been given an opportunity to actually trust this country with our health. And so those who feel like they have these real apprehensions towards the science community are justified in that. And so I'm hoping that this video can expose a lot of those who don't understand why Black people are so hesitant to jump on a new medicine or jump on this new way that could be helping people with vaccines and stuff. But also, I hope this exposes those who are a little bit rushing to judgment too. Because our community right now is being impacted by COVID at astronomical rates. Whether that is being taken away from being able to be exposed to opportunities to get medical services, or have any way to get access to these vaccines that could actually help our community. What they're not talking about, for the most part, is how the vaccines are not being given to some of these communities because they're being purposefully transitioned to other communities. So, like, where more prominently white, wealthy communities are, those vaccines that should have been going to Black and brown neighborhoods are not going there. And it doesn't help that there is an apprehension of historical racism through science and medicine. So I hope that with this video, with this episode on racial science, we can actually start debunking and asking better questions now that we have an idea of where this apprehension comes from, why we're not so trusting, and what we can do as a community to make sure that we can reduce that and also get the help that we need. I recommend going to a Black doctor. If you don't know where to find one, check out blackdoctors.org as a starting point. And don't just go in saying, I want this, or I don't know what to do. Just ask for a consultation first. See if you can get a consultation on your general medical questions or even COVID. And I really hope that it's a learning experience for you so that you don't just feel like people are ignoring your real fears. I know this episode was a lot, but I hope to see you next time for more on the Reconstruction Era. Thank you so much for watching Face Facts Friday here on Colorful Story, and I will be happy to see you next time. Bye.